by some of the, let's call it, smaller teams. There's no easy game. Every week you've got to be at your best. And I learnt at West Point a few years ago when I visited them. Their mantra is you've got to be at your best when your best is required, and your best is required every day. We weren't good enough on Friday night, and we've got to pitch up on Saturday.
It was announced John Clayton's going to be staying around for 3 more seasons. I'm sure you're delighted he's put pen to paper.
Yeah, he's one of the old men of Munster rugby. I think he always brings it with his physicality, and the most important thing is the type of person he is. He's a team man through and through, and we're very lucky and very excited to keep him there for the next 3 years.
Ireland's options around his position are strong at the moment, but he does become Irish qualified in the new year. Is he the type of guy who, if he decides to declare, do you think he'd be strong enough to get near an Irish squad?
I believe so. I believe the communication has been open to make it a possibility. I don't think it's in his mind right now.
A lot to pick through there, Matt. You join us on the line there as well now. I want to bring you in here because you were kind of outspoken about Munster's performances so far this season. I know that defeat away to Cardiff 37-13, following on from a period in that game where they didn't score for nearly an hour, which is strange in the extreme for a side that you would think are as talented as Munster should be.
Well, Richie, it's real problems for Munster. If you look, they were asked to make 119 tackles, but they missed 20, so they're missing, every 6 tackles they're missing 1. 13 turnovers on top of that. It was a very poor performance. They let in 2 tries from set piece, and the real problem was all 4 tries from Cardiff, who have been exceptionally poor to date. They went through Munster. Now, this isn't something new. Munster, in the last 17 away games, have only won 5, so it's their form on the road that is really, really poor. At home, Keith mentioned last week, they're a very good side, and their home record is very, very good. I think they've, in the last 2 years, they've only lost 1 game, which was to Leinster. So that's a very good home record, but it's away from home. And if you're going to do anything in Europe, and even in the Pro 14, you've got to pick up points on the road. But it wasn't just that they got beaten, it was that the defence was so poor, and they were dominated at the breakdown. The pace of which Cardiff could play the game was at a pace Munster's defence couldn't cope with, but they couldn't control the pace of that ruck. Spinning forward, they'll probably have an easier week of it this week, being at home, and Ulster have had to come back from Africa, so Ulster are going to be pretty tired. Ulster will bring in some new guys. But that shouldn't detract from what our conversation in the long term is about Munster. Because as Keith said, it's September. Got to keep this in perspective. It's early in the year. But both away games to Glasgow and then to Cardiff for Munster have been really poor. And if we spin back to last year, the last game, the semi-final in Bordeaux, really poor again. Defensively, especially in all cases, it's a real issue. And 2 of those tries, I said, I think Munster made Halaholo look like a champion. It's like he had spiders on him. There was 2 line-outs, 9 to him at 12 to Halaholo, and he just ran through them. And that's just not acceptable at the top end of the sport. I'm hearing Coach Van Graan saying that, but when you're doing it week in, week out, that's a problem. And that's my question on Munster this year, and we're not going to answer this for a while, and I'm not suggesting that this is a defining moment, but this is why the jury's out about Munster.
Keith,
this type of performance.
Keith, we're approaching a year of the Van Graan era soon enough. Have you seen enough of his stamp? It's something that Matt seems to be alluding to there, is that we don't necessarily know what the Munster style is under Johan Van Graan just yet.
No, and I think elements of that are frustrating. I would find it really difficult to argue with Matty in terms of his comments this week because, look, I've met Van Graan a couple of times. I actually think he's a really good coach. I think he's got great capacity. I think he needs, and Munster needs, for the most part, very much a full team when they go out and play. And just for a little bit at the start of that, some of the guys they brought in hadn't played a huge amount of rugby. Mike Sherry hadn't played a huge amount of rugby. Cleete hadn't played a huge amount of rugby. And that area of the field, which is the area inside 10, has to be one of the strongest defensive areas. So the two places you're really looking for to be very strong are at 13, which is a very difficult position to defend, and inside 10, because you have to protect your 10's shoulder. And that's where Munster were poor. And look, I know these guys are good players, and I know that they're well able to play. They have to get up to match speed very, very quickly, because if you don't slow down the ball at ruck time, as Matt said, then you're in a tougher position defensively. And you have to be unbelievably quick up in the line there. Where I got frustrated with it was the hit and the tackle didn't happen. It seemed like almost a bit of a soak. So a soak that then became a fall off of a tackle. The rest of the team can't tidy that up. You have to get yourself to a point defensively where you trust the players to make the tackle. Once they make the tackle, you're fine. If they don't make the tackle, it's going to be a score for the opposition. That's actually the way it's supposed to be. You don't want to be covering everybody all the time because you run out of gas by the end of the game. So for me, it was, for whatever reason, players not fully up to match speed, attitude not being fully right, again, for whatever reason. And Munster don't get a huge amount of look in terms of that. When you look at Leinster, they have a much...
they have a deeper reservoir of talent.
They have a deeper reservoir of talent, but they also have far less players coming back from injury. And so the players that are in there, it doesn't seem to have as much of an impact when you make a change. For Munster, for whatever reason, and for maybe some of the lack of depth of talent, they struggle a little bit more in these games. And look, I would say the same, but for me, attitude-wise, you have to go forward. Yeah. You can't give a really good ball-stepping centre who is a good player but not a great player, to paraphrase Dunphy. You just can't give him the space to be able to step at 100 miles an hour. You have to close that down. And Munster didn't do it. So they played some really good rugby in the first half, were in a good position to go and do it, and then nothing happened afterwards. So for me, defensively, well off the mark, attitude-wise. I was a bit disappointed that we weren't seeing a huge amount with the ball in hand. Yeah, that was my issue in the second half.
Matty, without wanting to make excuses for them, when you are missing the best scrum half in the world at the moment in Conor Murray, and there remains a lack of certainty over when we're actually going to see him on the pitch again, it is a massive fall off to go to your number 2 or possibly number 3 scrum half, and then again have the added weight, I suppose, of waiting for Albie Mathewson to be cleared to play. You're still waiting to properly integrate Joey Carberry into the starting 15. Chris Farrell's going to be missing for we don't know how long still. There are still a lot of major injury problems that Van Graan's had to deal with there, and injury problems in key areas of the pitch.
Absolutely, and you put Keith Earls on top of that, who was probably the form Irish player in the Grand Slam winning team. And they're all valid points. And again, certainly not trying to suggest here that the season's over, this is all wrong. But I think, come back to Woody's point, when Munster teams of the past, and I'm saying this with great respect to the red jersey, they don't miss those tackles because it's attitude. That's not talent. That's not Keith Earls, or that's not Conor Murray. That's passion and desire to make the physical commitment to the tackle. Now, passion and desire to make physical commitment, they go hand in hand with what we associate with Munster rugby. And I haven't seen this for a while, and I feel very, I'm reluctant to say it because I don't want to look like I'm picking on Munster, but I say it out of great respect for one of the best opponents I ever went against as a coach. But they didn't turn up, and they haven't been turning up like that physically to make those tackles. So that 12, Halalala gets the ball. It's not a sneaky play. There's nothing no people in motion. You got a big dude, he's running at you. It just takes some courage and nuts to get there and make the tackle. And unfortunately, they didn't do it on a number of occasions. The scrum half, Thomas Williams, in the last try, just picks the ball from the base of the ruck and runs at the second defender and goes straight through and scores a try. Now, I can tell you, I coached against Munster from 1999 to 2000 and when did I leave? About 2010 or 2009, and mate, I never saw that. And you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Now, it didn't matter who was there. They might have been talented guys, but geez, they were tough guys. Now this team, it's not about. We're not talking talent. We're not talking attacking structures. And I agree with Keith. Let's just stay on defence. That's an attitude, And that has to change, and that can change with attitude. I would put on top of that I didn't see the attacking structures being put in around a talent like Joey Carberry to make some differences. What we saw in the first half were individual breaks, individual talent that led to tries, but we're not seeing that attacking structure that I think they need. Now, that will take time, and that's what I'm sort of saying on the show, as I've said in the number of weeks. We won't see that attacking structure until Christmas. But again, we've just got to comment, we haven't seen it. But it's the defence that really, really concerns me. The
defence and the attitudinal thing, I'll bring you in on that, Keith, because that's got to be a worry as an ex-Munster man and a man of decent standing in that province.
Yeah, it's funny. You can become into a very bitching session very, very quickly. I do think there's an element of time to incorporate Joey in properly. I think that is true. I think the attitude can be sorted in a week. And whereas, as Matty said, he hasn't seen that from Munster before, I've seen it from every team before. There's times when you don't get it right, and maybe Munster have just been a little bit slower around getting it because they're incorporating a lot of players back in through injury, because I was seeing some of the gaps from guys who haven't played a huge amount of rugby. And so I think that is I think Munster chastened by it last weekend. You can hear it in Van Graan's in his words. They're not happy with it, but I think that's something that can be solved, because when if you make a mistake, you can say that's a mistake. If you do something wrong, you can say that's something wrong. If you're getting a few things wrong, like a few missed tackles, you say, okay, that could be attitude. That could just be whatever it is. The focus that you do in a week can get that back fully up to speed. So, look, I think if we're having this conversation in 4 weeks' time, we know there's far more of a problem. We're upset for the simple reason that Munster didn't score in 50 or 60 minutes last week, and that's what we wouldn't expect to do. But I will say, when you look at all the matches over the weekend, and this isn't offering an excuse, the home teams were the teams that seem to be infinitely more comfortable. And I do think that is a little bit of part to do with September and the Pro 14 and how it's actually dealt with. And that evens out over the season. So what you need to be able to do when you get a result like last weekend is to say, okay, that was the result. This is not indicative of where Munster are going to be for the rest of it. Let's not get bogged down in it. Let's be a little bit peeved by it, because we shouldn't let that happen again. And let's just go ahead and take it up from here. So you just don't want to get yourself in a position where you feel as if you're on a downward spiral, or it gets too negative inside the camp. It can be negative outside the camp, but to be honest, the guys inside the room will be far more peeved than we are. That's for certain.
Wherever you happen to be watching us this evening, keep your comments coming in on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, text and Instagram. You could be named our Heineken Star Comment of the Week and win yourself a pair of tickets to Leinster's Heineken Champions Cup opener against Wasps on October the 12th. Heading to the other side of the ball in that game, we'll look at Ulster. We spoke with Jordi Murphy as well. It seems to be settling in pretty well up at Kingspan Ravenhill at the moment, and says he has no regrets about moving north, a decision he says was his and his alone.
This is purely a decision for myself. I'd come to a crossroads in my career, and I realised that I needed to move, and I weighed up my options, and Ulster felt like the best fit. And obviously I'd looked at teams abroad as well, but it was the driving factor was that I wanted to represent Ireland, and with a big World Cup around the corner, I thought that this was the best move for me. So I talked to Joe once or twice, but he wasn't leaning me one way or the other. He just said to keep him in the loop here and there, and I did so. But it was purely a decision made by myself and my family.
Aside from wanting to stay within the Irish system, and as important as that was, what was the attraction for you about going to Ulster?
I just think they've got seriously rich history. Anytime I've gone up to play them, it's an incredibly tough game, not just because of the teams they put out, but also the kind of fan base they have behind them. So I thought myself personally, it'd be nice to actually go out there and have those fans cheering for you then instead of screaming at you. So that was a big driving factor. Obviously I would have known a couple of the boys from being involved with Ireland, like obviously Bestie, Hendy, Jacob, a couple of those boys, and then a couple of lads I would have played underage rugby with. Good friend of mine, Marty Moore, had signed for them a couple of weeks beforehand. John Cooney as well. I had a good chat with him over the phone, just seeing how he found it up there. Like, obviously he'd been at Leinster, Connacht and Ulster, and just what he thought of the place.
Yeah, Jordi Murphy there speaking with their own Will O'Callaghan. Matt, it's pretty much the opposite of the Joey Carbery move to Munster for Jordi Murphy there, in the sense that Carbery's was so handled by the IRFU, and this one was left up to Jordi and Jordi alone to head north.
They got that many back rowers that don't care, see? Look, I think Jordi just wants to play. He wants to start more weeks than he sits on the bench, and or gets rotated down at Leinster. I mean, there's so many options for Leinster in their back row. Sean O'Brien coming back and so on. He just wants to get out and play as much as he can, and who can blame him? And I think that if in the long term, within the Irish system, if players can do that, like the New Zealand system, where players can move within the provinces where they see opportunity and get the opportunity to play more games, I think that is really helpful for the national team. That's what the national teams want. The national team doesn't want the provinces warehousing players. They want those players out performing, and if they can stay within the Irish system and not go, as Jordi said, overseas to the UK or France, that's much, much better for Ireland. So I think he's to be applauded. And, you know, he will be welcomed there as I was, and the community, the rugby community, will look after him there as I was. I have only really, really positive things to say about the supporters and the team and the rugby community that I experienced when I was up there. And I'm sure that Jordi will also say that in this time goes on. And can I say that Ulster's performances in the first few games have been very positive. They won games and drew the last game just, but they're playing some really positive rugby. And you can see that there is a change in Ulster rugby this season, and whether Jordi's presence is part of that is only for the team to say. But for him personally, I'm very pleased for him, because it's a brave move. It's a tough call to do what he's done. It takes a lot of courage, and he deserves a lot of support and credit for it.
Keith, he's done pretty well so far, as have Ulster. They're undefeated so far. Just that draw, as Maddie alluded to there last week, 39 each against the Cheetahs. They've performed pretty well so far, and there's plenty of positives to be taken from those opening 4 games.
Well, I'll tell you, for that particular game, which was a crazy game of rugby, and elements of it were like touch rugby, but what Ulster have done is they've nailed their final kick in every game. 2 of them to win, 1 to draw there in that situation. They played some fantastic rugby. Billy Burns had a fine game at 10 for them at the weekend. He's been a really good find, and for him on his first big kicking game to kick one when it's gone past 80 minutes to draw the game was pretty impressive. But and they have a lot of young guys coming through too, and it is interesting. I'm mindful of Matty's comments of, yes, we absolutely have to keep the players within the system. I have to say we need to get more players coming through the other provinces and not just Leinster, because it will be detrimental if we end up with 4 Leinster teams playing in Ireland. We need to up our game in the other provinces, and we absolutely should hold them and try and keep them spread among it wherever we can. But I think the onus is on the other provinces to start developing more talent. I mean, Leinster have a cracking system in place. It's working incredibly well for them at the moment. But the rest need to up their game.
Getting to the crux of the matter, how do you see that Munster-Ulster game developing at the weekend, Keith?
I think we see Munster in a better position, a more settled side, guys who've played a little bit more rugby, playing at home, fully focused, because when you're having a few doubts with maybe there's things wrong and the attitude wasn't quite right, being back at home in front of your crowd, and it'll be a big crowd at the weekend, I'm hoping. I think that focuses the mind very much, and it's good to get home to try and sort yourselves out. It's trying to sort yourselves out away from home becomes very, very difficult. So look, I still don't like the idea of the South African journey. I don't know where that really fits into a tournament up here, and I understand the reasons why it's done. But for Ulster to have to fly back from South Africa to play a game, for me, I think that's very tough for them, and I think it'll be a good game because I think Ulster will raise their game, but I see it as Munster's to win.
A third away game in a row, Matty, for Ulster this coming Saturday night, and an injury list that's been growing and growing, I suppose, in the week of that. Vihan Herbst, Sean Reedy won't be in the squads, Henry Spate, Rob Herring, others that have had issues. They are hopefully going to bring a couple more back in, but as Keith alluded to there, it's going to be a very, very tough ask going down to Thomond Park with a side who've something to prove.
Very tough. Flying back from Africa, playing at altitude as well. I agree with Keith's comments on that game. It was a crazy game. It was a belter of a game. One of the kicks from the South Africans there was 62 metres. Because it was at altitude, it was a phenomenal penalty. I think it was about the 74, 75 minute mark. But for Ulster to come back from that, all those problems they've had, it's probably a bridge too far. Mm. But they're doing things that we didn't predict them to do. So I agree with Keith. I think Munster have everything to play for. I think it'll be a very good game, but Munster should win. History says they'll win, but I still have a great respect for what Ulster are doing. They're playing attacking rugby as Ulster. They're throwing the ball around, doing a lot of good offloading in the wide channels, and I think it'll be an entertaining game for everyone that turns up, and I agree with Keith. I hope there's a big crowd there to encourage everyone on.
They're expecting a very big crowd at the sports ground. They put in extra terracing for this Saturday's meeting of Connacht and Leinster. And Keith, Connacht looked like they finally clicked. It's something we spoke about on Monday Night Rugby with Eddie and also with Rory here in studio. It looked like the pieces had finally come together. Then Bundy Aki coming back last weekend was a massive boon for them, having I suppose a confident knee. Adi Loken playing on the wing as well, and Kieran Marmion really looked like an international quality scrum half, which is probably something we may need come November. Yeah,
I think it's Connacht are a joy to watch when they're happy. And I think if we're honest, they didn't seem to be too happy for most of last season, and they've lost a couple of matches at the start closely this year, which I'd say would remind them of what used to happen 4 or 5 years ago when they lose an awful lot of matches by 3 or 4 points. But then they've get it back into the idea of having a big performance and playing very well at the weekend and getting a good win at the weekend. They look sharp. I always think that when a guy comes back, you want him to have an impact as soon as you can. And Bundy Aki, cracking line, good half end power, and a beautiful soft pass out of the hand for the try was excellent. And they're always look. We've said it for a few years, especially in Pat Lamb's time. There seems to be a bit of freedom in how Connacht play, and it suits them. I think they've got their freedom back.
One of those players as well we didn't mention just there, Matty, to perform out of his skin against the Scarlets last weekend was Jack Carty. It was fantastic with the ball from the tee. He was also brilliant in his kicking positionally, fantastic with a pass as well, as was pointed out by Andy Friend. He had one of those games where literally everything went right for him, and he's now possibly in contention for that third number 10 spot for the Autumn Internationals for Ireland.
Yeah, I thought he was very positive. I don't want to be negative at all about him. I'd like to see him take the ball to the line a little bit more. I think his hands are nice and quick, and he, as you said, his kicking game has quality written all over it. I'd like to see him take that ball and go forward and commit the defenders just a little bit more. And I think when he does that, he'll open up even more space, or I know he'll open up even more space for his attackers. But I also think that's what will propel him into the reckoning for international standings. I think that he's obviously got Sexton. I think Byrne and Joey are in front of him at the moment. But what a lovely scenario for Ireland to have someone of his quality just starting on his journey. I think the Andy Friend will be very, very good for him. Andy's a game line attacking coach. He knows how to. All his coaching is taking the ball to the line and being very, very positive and threatening the line with your 10. And Jack will really benefit from Friendy's coaching. And I'm looking forward to seeing him improve and move on. I'm not so sure that he's at that standard yet, but I'm positive for his growth and his future. And I thought it was a cracking game.
Yeah.
And we also have to remember that the European champions are coming to Galway this weekend. That's why it's not just Leinster. This is one of the best teams in Europe coming along for what's going to be an entertaining game, because Connacht always play their best game of the year. Their number one performance of the year is always against Leinster at the sports ground. Leinster hate going there, I can promise you that. Every Leinster player, coach, the last 20 years hates going down there because they turn up and they play great rugby, and it'll be a belter of an evening, absolute belter. It's something,
Matty and Keith, I'll put this to you as well, that Andy Friend put in pre-season. Like, they always seem to raise their game for the inter-pros, and that their down points during the season have been pretty much in the immediate aftermath of those games. They have to go and face a Glasgow or a Cardiff or whomever else, and that they don't necessarily seem as up for those games. But Cian Healy's been doing plenty to stoke the fires ahead of this week. He was talking about the John Muldoon send-off, saying that was the lowest point of their season easily. He says, leave it to kickers, I suppose. On a personal note, that was nice for him to finish off his career, but is it something you have to take a bit of offence to when you're not taken seriously? They're chagrined in no small part by that defeat to Connacht last year.
Yeah, I don't know. He'd need to get a sense of humour. That was a great opportunity I'm never going to criticise a forward having an old pop of kicking the ball over the posts. That was at the end of a career to do that. No disrespect. I think you're searching for disrespect in all the wrong places, as they say. But it was a fairly agricultural kick. Maybe that was disrespect. No, let's not find and look for fault where there's none. If you're having to dig that deep, I think you want to get over yourself a little.
Neil Bray has been in touch about Jordi Murphy. He's feeding the rumour mill as well. He says, lads, Jordi won't get the top table rugby he would have gotten at Leinster, but he will get the game time he may not get at Leinster. Rumour has it, here we go, that he's back in 2 seasons too. That's from Neil and Bray. Neil, you're in the running to be named our Heineken Star Commentator of the Week. Matty, as you alluded to there, it's not just Leinster, it's the European champions pitching up beside Lochatalia this coming Saturday. They're a hell of a side, as we saw just this last week as well. They have a flair throughout their backline, with all of those tries last week coming from the backline as well. Felipe Contepomi's influence is starting to show among the defence there too. It's an embarrassment of riches they have, and when they're playing rugby like that, they're pretty irresistible.
Yeah, they're you can see Felipe's influence on the side. Their alignment, the back's alignment off the scrums, is very, very interesting. And Felipe's gone back 10 or 15 years to give this alignment. You cannot tell who's getting the ball from the scrum. They're standing very close together and very flat. And it's the old coaching mantra. What's the defence doing? Where can we exploit space with the defence? So Felipe's completely changed the starting alignment of the backs. So the opposition defence cannot pick who's going to get the ball and where they're going. And it's not new, it's very old, but it's fantastic. And I'm quite critical of a lot of coaches at the moment. There seem to be a lot of YouTube coaches. They just copy each other. There's no one really thinking out of the square, saying, well, what do we give to the opposition to make it uncomfortable for them? Give them what they don't want. And Felipe's done that. And the tries off the scrums in particular were really, really beautiful to watch for a rugby guy, because you could not pick who was going to get the ball, and there were people in motion, there were bodies everywhere, so much so that they went down on one 5-metre scrum, they went down the short side. It was only about a 20-metre short side with Sexton. He had 3 guys with him. He didn't need any of them. There were that many options. The defenders didn't know who to take, and Johnny just slid straight through. It's really nice thinking and really good coaching from the Leinster team. They look very, very good. The other thing they're doing well, which again isn't new, and I've been screaming about it next to Woody there for years, is they're coming back on the short side. They're hitting up and coming short side, which was what we were brought up with. But so many teams, Warren Ball with Wales, they go the same way, keep going the same way. I keep saying, well, why do you go and why are you attacking where there's 10 players? Why don't you just come back where there's 3 players? Isn't that the easiest place to attack where there's less defenders? And that's simply what they're doing. It's really, really good to watch. That they're very successful. But I've got to say, the opposition that they've faced so far have been pretty poor. We've got to call it. It's just like Keith said. It's September and teams aren't getting on. There was a player sent off for a very tough decision, but under the new laws, one you've got to support for Edinburgh. But their opposition with Newport and Edinburgh the last 2 weeks, they've been very, very ordinary. So it'll be interesting to see how they move forward in one at the sports ground this week, and then moving forward into Europe with Wasps and Toulouse. But they're a class act, and I've got to say, they're a joy to watch. An absolute joy.
Matty Williams, Keith Wood, thanks as ever. More from the lads next week. And coming up, a name that will be familiar to anyone who's watched the Masters as a kid in the 80s, and indeed the Ryder Cup itself. 3-time Ryder Cupper Chip Beck. He's on the way next.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. Visit airsport.ie.
News Talk Breakfast.
The government's plans to shore up 6 domestic banks to the tune of €400 billion should become law later today.
10 years on from the bank guarantee, how has one decision shaped where we are today?
Join us this Friday on News Talk Breakfast along with key players from the time of the crash to look back on a decade of austerity and look forward to a brighter future for Ireland.
We've assembled government officials, economists and most importantly everyday people to mark the anniversary of the bank guarantee that changed the course of Ireland's financial history.